I'd like to begin today's session by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And, a reminder that so much of volunteering is about, you know, uh, comes with building community and acknowledging place. And so I'd like to particularly pay my respects to the communities that have been, the peoples who've been building community here, where we are currently building community and volunteering on the lands for, 60,000 plus years. So, as I said, I would like to thank you all for being here. Today is the second in a short series that we at Volunteering Victoria are running around our state of volunteering research. So today's topic is called Volunteers in Focus, and understanding what the data from that state of volunteering research told us about volunteers from CALD, culturally and linguistically diverse communities. As a reminder for those who've joined us later, today's session is being recorded, so hopefully you will have gotten that message as you've arrived. So as I said, we are doing a deep dive today, and we are very, very fortunate to have some guest speakers as well from AIMS Australia, who will be speaking to you a little later on. And then finally, at the end of the session, we have provided some space for some breakout groups so we can continue to dig deep into the topic at hand and discuss how we can best support CALD volunteers moving forward. So for anyone who has potentially been living under a rock and hasn't accessed our State of Volunteering report, there is a QR code to access the State of Volunteering research there. We released this research in May, and I'm going to give a few general overview observations and learnings that came out of that report, as well as diving deep into some of the statistics around CALD volunteering. And as such, our wonderful comms lead has produced a snapshot about what the State of Volunteering report actually told us about CALD volunteers. So there's a QR code that you can download the snapshot there just to view that resource online. Please don't stress about, if your QR code function isn't working on your phone today. All of this will be emailed to you in the post-webinar resources. So just for anyone who hasn't engaged with the State of Volunteering research before, I'm going to give a few general overview pieces, and apologies to anyone in the room who has attended the previous youth one. There is a little bit of repetition just as we go through some of the bits and pieces about how we undertook the research, but I think it's important for people to understand where we got this overview and how we've come to this picture and pulled out some of these key questions. So in terms of how we undertook the State of Volunteering, we really did a little bit of reflective practice. So really dug into the existing research trends and sector knowledge on the State of Volunteering. There's been certainly a lot of State of Volunteering research undertaken by other state and territory peak bodies across the last couple of years. So looking at those, their setup, looking at the previous State of Volunteering research, which was undertaken by Volunteering Victoria in 2020. So recognising the specific time and place that 2020 was. So looking at all of that, we then undertook a public survey with over 2,500 respondents, which asked them specific questions about their volunteer involvement and how they engage in volunteering. And a lot of volunteers to share their insights, and we took a lot of that data, and there was a rich and then we dived into some focus groups. So we had 24 focus groups statewide, and those provided us an opportunity to really dig into the why and the detail, a lot more of the qualitative information rather than just the quantitative responses. All of that data, the public survey, the Leaders of Volunteering survey, and the data all went through a rigorous academic analysis by a team of researchers at the University of WA. and we launched a public-facing report, which is about 70 pages long. So, it's not an impossible read. It's not War and Peace, but it provides a really engaging lead into some of the big questions and big issues that we're facing as a volunteering sector. So, some of the key insights that came through that report are that 58.9% of Victorians volunteer on a regular basis, and that equates to over 3,200,000 people who are adults, in the 15 plus brackets. And that looks like about 222 hours per year per volunteer, engaged volunteer, or approximately about 18.5 hours per month. And it's worthwhile just really putting yourself in the headspace of these are macro trends. So knowing that some of you may be really, really down in the detail and saying, well, this is my club's experience, or I have volunteers who are engaged in much longer hours per month, or my team of volunteering, it's actually an event volunteering, but we're looking in this situation at the average across the state. And I've always found when it comes to placing some of the state of volunteering research in context, that it's really interesting to take the average and say, well, if my experience of the experience of my team of volunteers differ, why is that? And, what factors are influencing that? We also did pull out, a figure around the value to Victoria, which was sitting at approximately 27 billion. But it's worth noting that for those of you who are really eager and comparing this state of volunteering research to the last state of volunteering research, we have leaned in less to the financial analysis. And we're really focusing on what are the big issues that we're grappling with as a sector. So less about that financial valuation. If you're interested in deep diving into some of the questions around financial valuation, I suggest that some of you revisit the 2020 research and the way in which it broke down the social return on investment. So in terms of how some of that figure has changed, it's obviously up from 42.1%, which was the last figure that we had statewide of our rate of volunteering. It's really understandable that that figure was down when we collected the data. We were collecting data in April or May 2020. And so that was a very interesting period for us. We were able to capture a lot of information on the early impact of COVID, but it probably wasn't, representative of the most typical of years. It's worth noting that our formal rate of 58.9% is still lower than the national rate of 64.3%. And, that's probably reflective of some of the challenges that we still face as a state around rebuilding volunteer teams. And I'm sure you guys all have your individual journeys and stories that you can kind of illustrate some of that figure with. But interestingly, what has really changed and what has become clear to us through the process of this research is that the balance of our formal versus informal volunteering has shifted. So formal volunteering has dropped and continued to drop from 84% to 53%. But informal volunteering has shot up from 60% to 78%. And it's in this context that I wanted to continue to include these national statistics because historically, when we've talked about informal volunteering, often the discussion as related to CALD volunteers is that CALD volunteers are much more likely to be engaged in informal volunteering through their community. So this is leaning into some trends that CALD volunteers arguably have been participating in, for a long time and have been sort of paving the way. When it comes 1% of CALD volunteers, individuals volunteer, which is well above that state average of 58.9%. So clearly, CALD volunteers are giving their time on a regular basis, consistently higher than other groups of the of called volunteers expected to increase their involvement, and that was over a period of time of the next 3 years. So that's again a great percentage of those who are already volunteering who are expecting to increase their involvement. And again, called volunteers contributed about 234 hours per year, which was up from the average about 222. I see I've rounded up in the previous figure, but there is 221.6 hours. So thinking about what does that look like on an individual level, there are lots of key motivations and preferences. So the top kind of key motivations that called volunteers were reporting to us through that research and that public survey was they were motivated to volunteer, to use their skills and expertise, to give back to others who had helped them, and to support or learn about a cause. So those were kind of the highest percentage of motivators that were reported by called volunteers as really motivating for them to get involved. You can see I popped a quote from the State of Volunteering Research on the side there in that blue box. But, it's about a way of life. It's about seeing people in need, seeing communities in need, and going, what can I do as a person to help? There was also some really interesting data that came through about pathways into volunteering. So recognizing, that for a lot of called communities, perhaps higher than some of the non-called communities or non-called volunteers, online pathways and platforms, so social media and online Google search, they were there as higher rated pathways. There was also the notion of a professional referral that was seen as a really high way of engaging, or a key method of accessing a pathway into volunteering. Now, it's actually quite useful to kind of understand and break down, and apologies, this is a text dense slide, but I think what we're trying to articulate there is that compared to non-called volunteers, called respondents were significantly more likely to try and find opportunities through online platforms, the Seek Volunteer, social media. This is compared to non-called volunteers, and I think it probably reflects the fact that called volunteers are more likely to encounter barriers when trying to engage in volunteering, and so the existence of, say, either a referral by a professional, health or community services, or a volunteer resource centre, or an online, I guess, matching agent or referral tool was going to be more assistance for called volunteers than perhaps other volunteers who might more traditionally be finding pathways into volunteering through connections, family and friends, word of mouth, etc. And that was, I think, a key key learning or key lesson from the data. There were also, there was also a lot of data that came through around the key barriers faced by called volunteers. So work and study commitments was rated highest in terms of a key barrier to volunteering, though don't let that stop called volunteers, because they are obviously volunteering at a higher rate, but work and study commitments was probably listed highest, family responsibilities next, then income costs or expenses, and lack of transport. And, when we asked the question about what sort of barriers were faced by called volunteers, we had a response from 31% of called volunteers who'd experienced no barriers to volunteering, compared to 41.1% of non-called volunteers. So I guess recognizing that lower percentage when called volunteers were responding to that question versus the non-called volunteers, a greater percentage of called volunteers experienced more hurdles when it comes to entering into volunteering. As part of that, and feeding into the data around income costs or expensive being a hurdle, on average, and sorry, there is a typo there, that was meant to be on average, volunteering costs, called individuals, recognizing last month's slide, $409.38 per year. That's more than double the average for non-called volunteers. So recognizing that the costs faced by the community are high, and higher, more than double of non-called volunteers. That said, there is still a really great way there is still a really great payoff for called volunteers. Called volunteers in general had better well-being than called non-volunteers. On average, called volunteers rated 8 points higher in well-being than called individuals who didn't volunteer when it came to that public survey. So certainly the well-being aspects of volunteering are fairly well recognised throughout the research, but it was really interesting when we deep dived into the research. More than some other groups who face barriers and hurdles with volunteering, called volunteers had a huge payoff when it came to the difference in well-being compared to called non-volunteers. And we can speculate about the causes of that, but certainly their ability to create sort of positive bonds, and reflect identity through community, no doubt have a positive impact on for those called volunteers. I'm just going to now move into some suggestions for organisations in engaging with called volunteers, as well as some more generalised key insights. But I'll note that I'm going to be able to pause and have a look at some of the questions and comments coming through the chat in just a second. So other key general insights that really came through some of the data when it comes to the state of volunteering is that volunteering was not declining so much as transitioning. And what I mentioned at the start is really looking at that shift between formal declining and informal shooting up or surging. So recognizing that the way in which we volunteer, the way we want to volunteer and engage as a community is changing, and we as volunteer involving organisations, members of the volunteering sector, need to be able to adapt to that. We have informal and flexible and digital volunteering, which is on the rise, and when it came through in the data, those are on the rise, particularly for youth, members of core communities, so of relevance here, and people with disability. And so recognising, and we'll deep dive into some of that a little bit later, hopefully in our breakout room discussions. But I think it's really key, as I've been having conversations with individuals about what some of the state of volunteering research means. Flexible volunteering and making your volunteer program flexible, it doesn't necessarily mean turning your existing programs and offerings 180 degrees on its head. Sometimes it can be little shifts and adjustments to, capture more engagement and be more flexible and responsive to the needs of different community members. It's clear that formal structures and supports have been failing a little bit to keep pace with these shifts. And things like cost of volunteering, some of the red tape and complexity can be barriers to entry and continuation in volunteering. And I think, I'm sure Reshma and Cooney will talk about it a little bit more, but I think those barriers can be felt even more so often in communities like the CALD community. Volunteers in general at the moment are more purpose-driven, so people are really looking for roles with meaning and impact and alignment to personal values. And again, I'd like to really emphasize that this doesn't necessarily mean you have to flip your entire volunteer structure on its head, but it does mean people are really looking for an understanding of the impact that they're giving through their volunteering. And you have to be really clear and deliberate about that and making sure that you provide the opportunities to feed back to volunteers that purpose. And then, another general learning that I haven't really touched on through the data to this point is that behind every volunteer is someone making it happen, and recognizing that our leadership, there's unseen infrastructure that's under resourced at risk. I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one, but leaders and volunteers are under more strain than ever before. Sometimes they are from older cohorts, maybe unpaid, and managing programs without formal organisations and support. So we, as Volunteering Victoria, thinking about how we can provide more support, recognising that our system is under-resourced and at risk, due to some of those sustainability questions. So from a practical perspective, just before I hand over to Kuni and Reshma, I'd like to just list a few ways, food for thought when it comes to our generalised discussion later about ways we can more confidently adapt as a sector to CALD needs. So, to really think about moving forward for that inclusive future, think really deliberately about how you can reduce financial burdens, providing reimbursement access, offsetting high participation costs. And I recognize that when you have a limited budget, that can be really, really hard, to think about how you do it, you know, I recognize that there are real limitations, but thinking creatively, is there a way you can apply for a grant for offsetting public transport costs? Is there a way that you can provide a meal so a volunteer isn't coming home to then have to, make a meal or, face that cost? So offsetting, I guess, some of the costs of volunteering, strengthening the access pathways, you know, providing transport options, more culturally responsive onboarding, and again, those flexible role structures, recognizing that people, might be in a different process of a migrant settlement journey, might be wanting flexibility to build around employment and study. So making sure you have those flexible options and are able to present those to volunteers and potential volunteers, making sure that you as a VIO are investing in some culturally safe volunteering environments. So where you're really thinking about how to genuinely affirm identity and language and community values, and think about both your, I guess, physical front door, how your office is set up in person, but obviously recognizing that a lot of engagement happens virtually nowadays, or certainly you might have to be signaling those things right from registration and, online inquiry when you're thinking about the data and looking at the fact that more culturally and linguistically diverse individuals are finding volunteer pathways online. How can you make sure that your online advertisements or websites are showcasing that you're an inclusive and supportive place? Because that will really ensure CALD volunteers are attracted to volunteer with you, but also more likely to stay. Recognizing and valuing informal and culturally embedded volunteering, and not just formal registered hours. So that's obviously a thing that we have to work on society-wide, but recognizing that some of your volunteers, they may be volunteering formally within your context as a VIO, but they might be doing a lot of other things under a lot of other hats, as part of their community participation that really is volunteering, but it's not recognised as formally. And so, working with them to both support that and value that, but as well feedback some of their skills and achievements that they're getting through that informal volunteering as well. And then obviously building trust-based partnerships with CALD communities and thinking about how you can co-design those volunteer roles and leadership opportunities. So those are just a few prompts for thought. I am going to now introduce Kuni and Reshma from AIMS, who will give you just, a quick little overview about AIMS and some of their programs, the way they engage called volunteers. We'll then pause for some questions and then we'll move into some of those breakout groups, okay? So Kuni and Reshma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us. Hi, everyone. My name is Kuni. So I'm the volunteer recruitment and training coordinator. I'm here today with Reshma, and Reshma will talk a little bit of what we are offering at AIMS. Over to you, Reshma.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background about who we are. For more than 70 years, AIMS Australia, motivated by our vision of full participation for all in cohesive and diverse society, has worked alongside thousands of people who have arrived as migrants and refugees to facilitate their successful settlement in Australia. So basically, we are a settlement agency. We offer, education, employment, and education, employment, housing, all of those services for newly arrived migrants and refugees to settle into Australia. And now we are providing NDIS service as well. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Reshma. So just a snapshot of volunteering at AIMS. So currently we have around 300 volunteers and 70% of them are from CALD background. So they come from around 50 countries. Together, we speak more than 70 languages. 62% are women and 33% are men. We offer a range of volunteer roles to suit different people. Some are great for those who with professional experience. For example, job-ready mentor role. So this type of volunteer will help job seekers with things like resume writing and interview preparations. So other roles like office and admin support role or multicultural hub volunteer role are perfect for those who are new to Australia, who want to get involved, gain experience, improve language skills, and connect with the community. So we are really trying to make sure there are some things meaningful for everyone to join, no matter where they're from or how long they have been in Australia for. So Reshma and I also have some insights to share with you guys as well. So can you please move to the next slide, Sarah?
Kuni and I, we wanted to talk about some of the challenges of volunteers from non-English speaking background and language barrier. We want to talk about language barrier because I think language barrier is the first one. Like a lot of the people who are here in Australia, they have extensive knowledge, education, and work experience as well, but they've got that language barrier. So for us at AIMS Australia, we try to when we are encountering like volunteers with language barrier, we provide clear communication. That's why I think it is important. Kun and I wanted to talk about how important it is for us as an organization to make sure when somebody wants to become a volunteer with us, to be clear about what they are getting into. So we talk about the commitment, we talk about the expectation, role opportunities, and future employment. And a lot of our volunteers, in my experience, multicultural hub volunteers who come to work as a volunteer at multicultural hub, they are looking to get into paid employment. And sometimes we make it very clear that when they work as a volunteer, there is no guarantee that there is a paid role in AIMS, within AIMS. And I think that is important that you make that clear, because sometimes people come with that expectations and get sort of disappointed if that's not the case. However, in AIMS Australia, as a volunteer, after certain time, they can apply to sort of like roles within Australia, but we make that very clear from the very beginning. but we provide the like sort of support, for new volunteers with the language barrier. We do body system at Multicultural Hub. We have a body system where when the new volunteer comes, has a bit of a lack of language skills or lack of confidence. So most of the time it's confidence as well. We have a body system where we put that new volunteer with the old volunteer who's been with us for a bit longer, so that they can, like the new volunteer, get support from that old volunteer to learn about new system, or sort of gain that confidence. Kuni, do you want to talk about rising cost of living?
Oh, yes, sure. Thanks, Reshma. And yeah, that's right. So the rising cost of living is really affecting volunteer engagement. And over the past 12 months, so at AMC, we have seen this clearly. We found more and more volunteers are looking for short-term role instead of long-term commitments. And most of volunteers we recruited this year are actively job hunting. So they are volunteering to gain work experience and boost their chances to get a paid job. So to adapt to these changes, so we have made a few adjustments. So we reduce a minimum commitment from 6 months to 3 months, and we also offer online volunteer opportunities for people who cannot volunteer on site, or have like maybe just a few hours available to volunteer. And we found this actually works really well, because we can get volunteer from different part of Australia to help our clients, and also work really well for our students as well, because some students they cannot come to site to study because of their work and their family commitments. So we can say it works really well. It's win-win for both clients and volunteers as well. For volunteers who are actively looking for a paid job, so we have introduced a job ready program to support them with job applications. So we know that people are looking for a job, especially people from CALD background, and a lot of people they haven't had any work experience in Australia. They don't know about even like the application process. So we have job ready mentor program to help them, and also pair them with a professional mentor who can help them with something like writing resume, prepare for job interviews, or explain the job application process in Australia. And some people want to learn about Australian workplace culture, or even just how to build networking in Australia. And so this program has been run for about 6 months, and it has been a great way to help volunteer build confidence and take that next step towards employment. We got really good feedback from volunteers. For the financial barriers, so we recommend considering reimbursement option. At AIMS Volunteer, we have really limited budget. We can't reimburse everyone, but when we ask volunteer to assist client out in the community, we do provide them the MyKey cards, so then they can use that to travel. Yeah, and also, if you have limited budget for reimbursement, maybe you can explore grant opportunities for additional funding to address the real cost of volunteering. I found in Volunteering Victoria website also have really good information about grant opportunities as well. Yeah, but I guess the most opportunity are more for a smaller type of organizations, but the bigger organization may not have that much opportunities available. Yeah, it's quite a barrier for us as well. So yeah, but anyway, so at least we try to make sure that we can provide what we can to volunteers. Yeah, so I think that's it from us, Sarah. If anyone having any questions or anything, feel free to ask. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kuni and Reshma, for just sharing some of those insights from across AIMS programs. And I guess it's worth noting that one of the reasons we asked AIMS to come along today is, you know, settlement and working with culturally and linguistically diverse communities is what AIMS is all about. And so they're constantly applying some of these learnings across their volunteer opportunities, but, you know, working with populations as they're coming in and, you know, experiencing challenges. There have been a few questions that have come in, so I'll address a few, and then there's one that I might just clarify. I think it might be directly for you too, but some are much more related to the VV side of things. So there was one question that was asking about collections, comparisons with census data. We haven't included direct comparisons with the census data in the state of volunteering report, and that's quite deliberate because the method of collection is quite different. It's also worth noting that you know, the state of volunteering data, it's a full survey about volunteering for those public respondents. And, you know, the information in the census is based off one specific question. And the full survey is combined with the focus group data to extrapolate some of those learnings. So we thought it would be a bit disingenuous to do sort of a lot of that really direct comparison with the census data. But if anyone has any, you know, follow-up questions, feel free to contact the team at Volunteering Victoria. There were also a number of questions in the chat around the cost difference between CALD volunteers and non-CALD volunteers. And the answer is that was based on, you know, I guess a self-assessment. So individuals who were responding to the survey were asked what sort of costs they faced on a regular basis when it came to their volunteering. And there was a higher cost projected for CALD volunteers as opposed to non-CALD volunteers based on those two costs. We can speculate as to why that is. You know, my assessment would be some of those, you know, direct costs were more tangibly associated. If you're driving a car, for instance, to a volunteer opportunity, you might be less likely to put a monetary figure on the petrol that you've used for your car trip. Whereas if you're, you know, taking public transport, you have, you know, more hard costs associated with that travel to and from your volunteering. But again, that's, you know, there's a lot of speculation as to why that is. And I encourage you, we're going to go into breakout groups very soon to sort of try and unpack that a little bit. And then we were also asked about whether CALD communities are more likely to volunteer within the community, within CALD communities, or whether they were, you know, volunteering, I guess, in non-CALD related fields or causes. And the answer is it varies, but not necessarily. And I'll note that Jen, comms lead, has just popped a nice little comment on the statistics around where CALD volunteers are likely to volunteer in the comments. I'm not going to do it justice and remember every single statistic while, you know, juggling different screens, but they should be there in the chat for anyone who wants to have a look at them. There was also finally one question about can we provide some examples of remote volunteer opportunities? I am wondering or speculating, and if the author of the comment can just please provide a yes or no as to whether that was a question directly for Reshma and Cooney as opposed to VV. I can talk in general about remote volunteering opportunities, but I'm thinking it's possible that question was specifically around remote volunteer opportunities at AIMS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I can provide some example that what we do at AM. So the remote volunteer opportunity we have available now is the volunteer tutor role. So volunteer tutors are people who are helping our student learning English. So usually we just run a face-to-face class, but we do have some students, especially in Mildura, which is far, and then we can't really find volunteer who can travel on site. So then we turn it to remote position. Yeah. So we get some volunteer from over Australia basically, you know, to match with student in Mildura. And another role that we turn into a remote opportunity is the professional mentor role. So they actually meet remotely. And also the Job Ready program as well, the program that we support volunteer with job applications. We match them with professional mentor who who come from over Australia as well. So then so it works very well because people can meet the time that suit them. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm just aware of timing and wanting to make sure we have adequate time to really dig into some of our practice, reflect on some of the statistics when it comes to called volunteers in our breakout groups. So I've just got two more slides and then I'm going to let you all go and discuss. Beyond sort of the immediate learnings for specifically called volunteers, there were some general macro learnings that we had as Volunteering Victoria that are really underscoring a lot of the work that we're hoping to continue when it comes to the state of volunteering research. So one is that we really need to be supporting flexibility as a core design principle for volunteer roles. So volunteering must become more flexible to remain more viable, and that's going to look different at every single organization. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily meaning turning your volunteer role completely on its head and doing a complete 180, but thinking about and talking with your volunteers about what would make your volunteering opportunities more flexible and engaging for them. You know, it might be a simple shift or tweak or how you communicate expectations. We also are recognizing that we must embrace digital tools, obviously without losing the real relational aspect that is inherent in volunteering and something that is so engaging for volunteers. We have to be engaging with digital platforms that are accessible and intuitive, and recognizing that, you know, particularly some of the statistics around onboarding pathways, called volunteers may be leading the way and showing us how to do that, but making sure that we're not relying on platforms where no one is, you know, to be talking about volunteering and our volunteer opportunities. We need to be positioning volunteering as a pathway to growth, you know, a stepping stone for skills and employment for young people specifically, but in general. And we need to be strengthening the sustainability of our volunteer leadership. So, working as a sector to make sure we have an urgent investment in training, support, and succession. Beyond that, I've pulled together a list of a few different resources from across the internet, which if you're interested in engaging a bit more in this topic, those are some good resources to enable you to continue the deep dive and considering how you might be able to support communities. And without, you know, sort of further ado, knowing that, you know, we want to have, you know, at least 10 minutes to go away in breakout rooms and have a bit of a chat. I'm going to put you into breakout groups now. And I guess the questions that I'd love you to focus on are there particular barriers you have when engaging with called volunteers that might not have come through the statistics, the presentations? Are there particularly good examples of cold engagement that you've seen? Maybe you're going to pick Cooney and Reshma's brains and you know, just replicate the model at AIMS. And what resources, if any, would you like to see Volunteering Victoria develop? So I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms. I recognise some of you might have to hop off at this time, but I'm going to open those breakout rooms for 10 minutes and then we'll come together and reflect any thoughts people might have moving forward. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you. We're just hopefully going to get the others filing back in just a minute. Thank you. So, yes, I always love a good breakout room. It feels very like the closest I'll ever be to Doctor Who in terms of transporting to a magical place online. But look, we're all back together now. So, and I have stopped the slides and just wanted to offer the space to, you know, provide any reflections to the full group that you may have had, any light bulbs, aha moments, maybe reinforcing some of the things that you were already contemplating. But yeah, I thought I would open up the discussion for any further reflections. Feel free to take yourself off mute or, pop anything on the chat if there have been any aha moments after just spending a little bit of lunchtime time. I can see you've taken yourself off mute, Margaret. Is that a
Oh,
design?
that was pure accident. Sorry, I would not have known if you hadn't have said anything.
That's the virtue of Zoom. Zoom opportunities. Thank you, Andiopi, for the comment there. We're really committed to providing these sessions to give a space to really break down and understand the data, knowing that sometimes it can be really hard. You can get all these reports, but thinking about how you can put some of the learnings in practice, it's not often we get to actually step out of that operational space on a day-to-day basis and say, what am I learning? What am I understanding about the macro shifts of volunteering? So, yeah, I can see there are a few people who are running off to the next thing, which is very fine. But yeah, any other reflections, learnings people want to share? Otherwise, Lana, thank you.
I think one of the light bulb moments I had is that potentially we could use some of our more seasoned volunteers to run some online training sessions for those maybe that are younger or from CALD volunteer backgrounds where they need a little bit of extra support in terms of the level of education, because we have to comply with the aged care quality standards and the quality innovation frameworks. And sometimes that can be a lot of data for people to absorb, their legal responsibilities around volunteering in those vulnerable communities. So yeah, that's something that we might look into.
No, that's great. And really utilizing the buddy system.
Mm.
One of the things that I've used in past or talked about with CALD groups is the opportunity for group interviews when you're thinking about language skills and barriers, and the need to talk one-on-one with a person can be quite intimidating if your language skills are perhaps not as confident. So yeah, it's great. Lisa, I can see you're off mute as well.
I had two people in my group that sort of between the two of them had a bit of a exchange of ideas. One's not with us at the moment, but Liana might like to share that. But it was just about resources and creating resources to support CALD volunteering, and that for not-for-profits, how useful it would be to have a resource somewhere where you could have your material translated into other languages as a future resource if Volunteering Victoria is looking for anything, although Liana suggested that that she uses, I'll let her finish her own suggestion, it was a good one.
I think if you have access to Copilot, you can also do that. You can use it for translating.
Yeah.
And I'd certainly suggest, we've actually translated a bunch of fact sheets and guides on the Volunteering Victoria website. We sort of chose the languages and communities based on, population numbers in Victoria, but you're not always going to get everyone. What I would say is make use of the fact that we're in a, period of our lives where Google Translate and Copilot exist, but make sure where possible, if you're trying to engage with a community, you're verifying some of those translations, because we know that, obviously some of the online tools are great, but there are still some pretty hilarious mishaps. And making sure that you've verified some of those translations and, services shows that care and consideration for communities. So you're not just putting up something that gets it 70% right, but misses a key cultural tone or overtone. And so we actually engage with Polaron, a language translation service, rather than just utilizing automated translation services. We still have that on our website because it is worth it, but for some of those bigger, more frequently used resources, we have had them translated. But again, reaching out to members of a community to say, hey, we want to provide this resource, we want to engage more with your community. Do you have someone who can look at that translation and say, have we missed it? Have we got it right? That's a great opening bridge. It shows that you're trying to be inclusive. It shows you're trying to meet communities where they're at. Cooney.
Yes, Sarah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you can translate document for people who need support, but we would just want to share about AIMS as well. We do have volunteer who come from CALD background, but we don't translate the document. But what we try to do is we try to make everything easy for everyone to understand. And also we found, with the volunteer from CALD background, they appreciate if they can speak to someone who they can explain if they don't understand. I found that really helpful. They're quite scared if you tell them, okay, here is the document and then read it. Or if you don't understand, come back to me. Because some people, even though they don't understand, they feel like, I don't want to go back, because they may come from a culture where they feel like, oh, I look stupid if I go back and ask silly question or something like that. So I would say, the best way is, I mean, this is what I found anyway, just my opinion. Just make everything easy, use plain English, and also make yourself available. If they have questions, they can come to you and ask, or match them with a volunteer who may come from the same culture or speak the same language to help explain them. Yeah, because I found like many people afraid when I tell them, okay, go online and look for this, they actually come to you because they need help. So then they expect something that, like you can provide them face to face, or yeah.
And I would really reinforce that, Cooney, and just, highlight that, carving out that time in anticipation. So saying, hey, this is a time when we will be answering questions for you. So making sure the emphasis isn't on them to say, hey, I don't understand, but to say, hey, there's this time, it's embedded in part of our process. The use of plain language. As someone who's been around in the volunteering sector, I am as guilty as charged. Like, I fall back on acronyms. It can be so easy to, just forget that you're speaking in an acronym-laden language. And so really that emphasis on plain language English is so important, but also making sure that you have a critical friend outside of the sector who reads it and says, oh, okay, I can understand what was being said. Some of those checks go a long way. Now it's 1:02. Any final reflections? Otherwise, I'll let you all go on with your day, and I'd encourage you, the next session of our deep dives will be on messaging and digital media, so social media. That is happening in a month's time. It will be presented by another VV staff member, Jess. And we'll have some guest speakers for that session as well. So I'd encourage you to register for that. But yeah, thank you all for your time, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at the next session.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.